Hello, everybody,
Hello.
and welcome to Breaking Story with Young Screenwriters. We are an online resource and community for up and coming screenwriters, and I'm Alexie,
I'm Adam.
and that's Adam. And I hope that you enjoyed our brand new intro music, which was composed by someone in this stream.
Yes, Alexie.
No.
Yeah,
So,
it was New Year. Let's try a new theme song. That's the
new
idea.
year, new theme,
Might
as
have
we
heard it on the
say.
podcast, hypothetically.
Yes. Which, if you haven't heard it on the podcast, you should hear it on the podcast because that has been our new push of the new year too. Is that we take these live conversations and streamline them a little bit, put them on the podcast. So check that out. But yeah, so today we are talking about the menu. Um, so it came out a few months ago, but it just hit HBO Max on streaming. So we finally got a chance to check it out, and we are very eager to discuss it with you.
Yes, and I think this is an interesting movie, and sort of, it's not, in my opinion, a perfect movie. But it does has some interesting ideas, and it really sort of presents this sort of idea of what is satire versus like what is the presentation of like a traditional thriller. And I think there's some things to talk about in that sense. But Alexi, what
Yeah.
did you think worked about this movie?
Well, before we jump in, the one thing I do want to say is quick warning that this film is a dark comedy horror that deals with suicide and self harm and things like that. So that is going to come up in our discussion just as we talk about the plot. So, quick warning there. But in terms of what I think really worked about it, um, I thought I absolutely loved Nicholas Holt's character. I thought he was so perfectly annoying and pitiful.
Yeah.
And it was a really good balance of making him someone that you're just like, can you stop talking? But also you just kind of want to hug him. I thought it was a nice characterization there. I also found myself laughing quite a bit. Uh,
Yeah, there were some funny
yeah,
ideas.
absolutely. What about you? What did
Um,
you?
I thought the ideas of the plot were very good. Um, I thought the the concept of the division between the staff and the clients,
Yeah,
the the rich and the service industry. I thought that was a really interesting idea that I would have liked to see explored more. But I really liked that sort of "are you in or are you out" sort of like aspect. I don't know where to place you. Um, that was an interesting idea, and I really liked the aesthetics of the movie. I mean, that's a very shallow thing, but like the promise for me of this movie, especially in the first act, was, oh, this is kind of like a Chef's Table episode, you
yeah,
know, where, the dishes are presented with like the text in the same way with like the elegant music. And like it is a satire of that experience. That was interesting for me. What I didn't respond to was the story. And what I
mm,
mean by story, I mean like the emotional undercurrent of the plot. Um, and I agree that Nicholas Holt's character was interesting because he was so flawed and so clearly obnoxious in that world. Like we all know that person who gatekeeps experiences and like is like constantly hyper intellectualizing, explaining and romanticizing some sort of aspect of art. Like there are people who do that with films, and we all know that type of person and archetype. And it was really cool to sort of see, okay, this person is the perfect companion to go into this world. Like Anya Taylor-Joy's character Margot was very much like the audience proxy. If she doesn't know anything about the world and he knows everything, I mean, he knows everything, but he's so obnoxious about it.
yeah.
I thought that was really well set up.
I agree. I agree. I feel like he is, as an actor, he's just so good at taking obnoxious people
Yes.
and making you somehow be like, you're horrible, but I like something about you, particularly in The Great. Like, his character does some trash things, and
Oh,
part
yeah.
of
He
you
was
is
great in
still,
The Great. Yeah.
yeah, and part of you is
Great
still
cast
just
in that movie.
like,
Show.
yeah, I freaking love that show. That's a phenomenal show. Yeah. So, kind of coming at it from satire, I think I really expected this to be a take on Eat the Rich that was a little bit more literal. I really thought as we started building up, I'm like,
Yeah.
they're gonna eat these people.
Well,
Like they're gonna
also,
serve them to
there was a
them.
promise. I felt like it was a Chekhov's gun when she took them out to the shack. When the I forget what her name, but like the administrator takes
Yeah.
the everyone out to the shack with all the meat in it, and they said we've been aging it forever, and if you mess it up even slightly, you'll die of like food poisoning or whatever. I thought like, oh, that's human meat, and
Yeah.
they never
I
came back to that. It was a totally loose stretch. Or I thought they were going to eat. Sorry, spoilers. Moving on from this point, I apologize. Um, I thought we were going to have a body that we were going to consume by this point.
yeah, I
Like
really thought we were going to eating people.
that was a
And
promise. I wanted that too. I really wanted that.
yeah, it's like I was kind of expecting a what was that thing in Game of Thrones where she like serves the pie of his children back to him with
Yes,
the yeah. I was really expecting something along those lines. I'm not saying that that's what I want in this world, but that's what I was expecting.
and there's this idea of like promise to the audience, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, so you had a different sort of expectation going to the film than I did. When I went in, I did not know it was necessarily intended to be or interpreted as a satire. I came in expecting like a good meaty thriller, maybe, a little
Yeah.
campy around the edges, but like I was expecting like them to really say something interesting about, like, the cast was so good and it was getting such good reviews that I didn't really look into. I went in cold and I had just a different expectation for the movie. And right around the break into act 2, I had this issue where I really felt like, so there was this promise of, okay, these are the diners, and this is the experience being presented to them, like by the service staff, right, by the chef and his vision. I wanted there to be a more interesting decision space for the characters rather than just having them be victims who had to like sit it out. Like there was no choice. It was all, you're going to die. We all know you're going to die. I'm going to die too. And there's nothing you can do, and there's nothing you can really interact with. And I'm also fine with with sort of a scenario where, oh, we were all doomed. But like, they all just accepted that for the most part, with the exception of Margot, who was trying to escape. But like everyone else was just sitting around and not trying to do anything. That really rubbed me the wrong way. I was disappointed. I was like, I wanted to see like some interaction between the diners and the dishes, see a decision space for the characters with stakes to escalate, see a plan hatch. Like that's part of the promise of death game movies, right? And this was kind of like a death game.
Yeah, that's true. It like reminds me of like any kind of horror where you're in a house and like being hunted and you're in
Yeah.
like one confined space and you get to kind of see everyone fighting to get out and getting picked off kind of one by one. And there's something kind of fun about that. Like you'll have characters who like do something stupid and get killed first, but there is something about that format that I think is interesting that for better or for worse isn't there in this, where instead of there's a few moments where everyone kind of fights. There's the moment where they all try to run,
Yeah.
which was interesting.
But that was
But that was even
structured.
handed to them.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was like, everybody's going to run for, do you know what it really was? They kept deflating the stakes every time the chef would monologue.
Mm.
Because he would explain to them exactly how they're in danger, exactly how it's hopeless. And then it played out exactly like he said it would. And it was kind of like he was God and he was toying with them and there was nothing they could do.
Yeah.
It was a weird, I don't know. That kind of bugged me a little bit. It took out the stakes. It made me not excited to see what happened next. Although I will say the ideas were really funny. Like, for example, the washed up the washed up film actor who, like, the reasons why everyone was there was an interesting idea of like, okay, this was the diner who came 11 times but couldn't even remember the last dish. This was the critic who had who helped him early in his career but was trashing like contemporaries and caused ruin of other restaurants. He was just this guy who on the chef's one day off of the week, he saw his movie and hated it so much he felt like his day off was ruined. So like he just wanted to get revenge on him. Like that was a great idea. That was such a funny joke.
I thought that there was a lot of moments that I laughed out loud. For example, the one like where the one girlfriend or the one who's accompanying the washed up star is like, "Why am I here?" And he goes, "Wait, where'd you go to school, Brown? Do you have student loans? No, then you deserve to be here."
I love that too.
Enough.
That was really funny. Again, like my problem was really just like my emotional experience with the movie. Even campy movies, like for me, like I want to feel like I care. Like even if it's like I'm laughing with the movie, like rather than at the movie. And I was laughing at the movie at some points towards the second half. Towards the second half, I went from laughing with the movie to laughing at it. And that was my personal experience. And I would also say I didn't watch it in a theater and, you know, whatever, yada, yada, yada. But it was because the story sort of didn't like hold up the ideas I wanted it to. And here's the thing, there's some really interesting story ideas on paper. Like, for example, the whole backstory of he romanticized this period of time when his love of cooking was pure and he was just a fry cook in a restaurant making cheeseburgers, and she uses that information against him and gets her way out of the death by asking for him to cook her a cheeseburger. Like that was a really clever idea and I thought that was really interesting, but I didn't emotionally feel like I had earned that. Like I think the way they wrote her character was very flat and she had no flaw that I could discern necessarily.
My interpretation of her flaw, if I was going to try to break this down because I was thinking about it before, it's written with her as the protagonist, right? And her objective very quickly is to get out. She very quickly is like, I'm fed up with this and I'm still hungry and I'm going to leave now. Like, I'm over it. And so then that was her objective, was get out. And I feel like my interpretation of her emotional arc as written is that she goes from someone who's not going to participate to like participating in a way that lets her live. That's what I think it
even
like.
But even then, I don't think that actually happened, because in my interpretation of, like, I thought she was the same person on that boat on the way out chewing the cheeseburger than she was in the first second we saw her. Like she didn't really, like, I would not say like she really participated in the game. In fact, anyway, she kind of like said "fuck you" to everything, and she was saying "fuck you" from the beginning.
Maybe it's partially like the fact that she was there at all. Like she was okay to a degree with being Nicholas Holt's second pick for this. Like he was going to take someone else. And at the very beginning, she's like, don't be embarrassed. It's fine.
No, she was a prostitute.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that too.
He paid her. Yeah. It wasn't like he was a second pick. It's like he couldn't find anybody. He paid somebody to come.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting reveal.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's like at the very beginning, she was kind of like okay with being in this position. And she came back. Like she got to the radio. She came back. She was still kind of in it with other people. And then it wasn't until the very end that she's like, you know what? No, I'm going to go. I'm going to leave you all. Like, see ya.
But do you know what I mean? Like there was no like.
Yeah, no, it's not very strong, I would say. Like it, or it's.
I see what they were trying to do. I definitely see what they were trying to do. But like, was it like interesting or powerful or thematically relevant, or like did it do the thing that movies are supposed to do?
I don't think that there was much of a catharsis with this movie, and maybe that's kind of what you're getting at. Is it's like there was like a moment like where you're like, ha, she got off because of the cheeseburger, and that was kind of a relief. But there wasn't, and then watching everyone die as s'mores was a little funny. But I think, you know, there was no real catharsis moment. And I still enjoyed it. Like I still thought it was fun, but I was kind of missing that. And kind of to circle back about the topic that we chose for this film, which is writing for actors. I feel like in this version, however it came to be, Margot was not the writer's favorite character. Like it felt like the writer was much more passionate, in my opinion, about the chef and about Nicholas Holt's character in a lot of ways. Like
And
it felt
even
like,
all the side characters, like
yeah, it felt like Margot's character was just kind of there. Like they didn't give Anya Taylor-Joy much to work with.
honestly, it was just a lot of protagonist energy. Like it was like very like, oh, she was just arbitrarily like a lot of her characteristics were like she's the main character and she doesn't care, she's not going to buy into this stuff. But I was like, why? Like even
Yeah.
from the beginning when she's like very like, I was kind of like my first impression of her character was because I didn't know that they weren't like dating or something. I was like, wow, she's like really like cruel to somebody's passion. Like what? Why? Like let somebody have space for the things they love, and like they took
Yeah.
you here. Like why are you so close minded? And like I was like very like like
Yeah, I
he
didn't.
loves this, right? Like it was weird to see like somebody's complete and utter disdain for someone's passion of an art form to be played as a positive.
Yeah, I can
I
see
understand that it
that.
was also like, oh, it's so pretentious. And yeah, no, I
No,
get
but at
that.
this, I agreed with that though. It's like she did have that one genuine moment where she was like, "Why are you into this?" And then he like had a very poetic explanation, and she was like, "Wow, that was actually really cool." And I'm glad that they gave him and her that beat because I think it was really interesting and important. I will say my personal takeaway, because I have never been to a restaurant like this where they do like 17 courses and they're all really tiny, is that if I ever go to one of these restaurants, I'm going to go in knowing that it's more of like a show and an experience than it is a meal. That is my
I
takeaway.
think that that's also kind of not fair to that because as somebody who has done that type of experience, usually at a good restaurant, like an actual like you're full, like you just ate 17 courses. like it's not like I think the
Mm,
way they played it being like, oh, and you didn't even eat anything is like, yeah, it's small portions, but 17 of them, like you're gonna
yeah.
be full by the end of the experience, or else like they don't. I thought that was kind of like the writers are just kind of trying to like,
It does remind me of this thing I saw on Twitter where a woman wrote up her like worst dining experience ever at a restaurant like that, where they literally just like one of them was that they had a mold of the chef's mouth and you were supposed to like lick this custard out of the chef's mouth. It was just the
that's
weirdest
weird, that's
thing.
interesting, that's
And yeah,
interesting.
I need to find that article, but that's like my context. That's kind of like I read about that, then I watched this film and I'm like, okay, if I go, I'm just going to expect it to be weird. Um but yeah, it's I don't know. So what would you how do you think they got Anya Taylor-Joy? Like if you were right, like
I mean, I don't
why
know
was it
the
successful?
background. I don't know the
Mhm.
background behind the idea and how they packaged it. I assume she liked the script or that other people were attached at the time. Like, I don't have that information, but I assume, like, for example, if they got Ray Fiennes and you're like, oh, here's the new Ray Fiennes is attached, or this director you like is attached. Well, not the necessarily the director, but that's typically, and also money.
Okay, here is my question for you. You get to do one more draft of this script.
mm,
What do you work on in that? Like what kind of pass are you doing in this draft?
I would work at making the characters more active rather than reactive to the
Mhm.
game that's happening. Like for me, that's what I would work on. Like if this was just a script I got notes on, and that's what I would focus on. I would focus on the and I would also create more of like an explanation for like the worldview of the chef, because it did like throw me a little bit. Like he managed to convince like 30 world-class chefs who were working with him to all suicide cult. Like, and we didn't really get any real insight into like what the reasoning was. I mean, at the end, I get the whole eat the rich thing, and it's all the dish, the final experiences that we all, I'm gonna make s'mores out of all of you. Like, I got that, but like, what was like the real emotional core of that moved
Yeah.
people? I feel like if we understood that, it would have been made more interesting, like an actual philosophical conflict between Margot and him, like, because I get that she's like, screw, this sort of false false experience, this false promise of this empty experience that you call fine dining or whatever, and that you're so disconnected from your roots. But like that felt kind of different from like what his actual beliefs were. I don't know. I would work on like kind of the philosophical beliefs of the antagonist and protagonist, and I would make all of the characters a little bit more active in trying to get out, and like sort of explain, make it more like a death game. I think that would be interesting. Have some of the characters die earlier on. I probably wouldn't kill Nicholas Holt's character so quickly. Because I did like that reveal that he knew he was going to die, and he came anyway. That was really interesting. I thought that won me some brownie points back again. I wanted to know more about that, but then they killed him the moment he became actually really interesting, and then everybody else was alive. I would, there are a lot of things I would focus on personally for like creating the experience that I would find meaningful. Like her act of defiance at the end has to like feel, I don't know, emotionally satisfying, and I don't really even know where she was coming from. She was just kind of defiant of it.
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. Something that you pointed out to me that I thought was interesting is that like this isn't how you put it, but the question you raised is like, does this allegory or does this metaphor work? Like, and I think that it becomes much more powerful when you understand kind of the motivations for why people are there. And this is what you pointed out to me, is that typically the people who are in these kitchens tend to come from pretty privileged backgrounds as well.
Well, it depends, but it takes a lot of years of culinary school, like typically to.
So it's like, are they really distinct from the people that they're going after? Is this like, it felt more like it was the chef's revenge rather than some sort of social statement.
Also, the sous chef had that weird dinner they had with the sous chef, and she was like, "Oh, the death thing was my idea." that was a funny moment, but then I thought about it being like, "Wait, who are you? Why? Like, what's happened?" It was so.
Yeah,
I would have almost preferred like to see some sort of like the real life parallel. I would have liked to see was like more of a dissonance between like the exploitation between the chef and his own workers too, because he's part of a privileged class. Like he's a millionaire.
Yeah,
probably like people in his business. Actually, there's an interesting event that parallels this. Noma in Copenhagen, which is considered one of the most one of the finest restaurants in the world, voluntarily closed itself because the chef believed that it was no longer economically sustainable. Like from the business model didn't work for the employees or the employers. Like it physically couldn't do what it took to achieve like the experience on the level they were trying to create it was not worth the cost on the people to make it.
Interesting.
And that just happened like a week or two ago. New York Times ran a piece on it. And I think that kind of parallels kind of some of the ideas on this movie of like, these, you're creating this experience for the ultra elite rich. I mean, Noma, like they're famous for like making deer heart, right? like everything foraged locally in the area, right? Like it's the same idea of this place. Everything comes from the island they're on. And it's this idea of, oh, we're living off of the land. It's part of an environment. It's authentic. It's like it's using everything from an environment the way like people used to back before capitalism or whatever. But it's for the ultra rich. It's for these like obscenely wealthy people to have like this, gated off experience. Like that is an interesting idea.
It's interesting how they try so hard. I mean, that does show up in this, like where they try so hard to be like real, but then the only people who can achieve it are not the service workers, which I think was like a theme that they were trying to tie in when they had the chef talk to Margot. Like they really tried to get at it, and it feels like something that probably could have been explored more, maybe got lost in some edits of like, you're not really supposed to be like, this isn't really you.
Do you know what I here? Do you know my one? I'll amend my comment and say my suggestion, my suggested change for the movie would be to make Anya Taylor-Joy's character have the attributes and beliefs of Nicholas Holt's character, and have
Yeah.
her be the one who's like dreaming and idolizing this experience, and then having that dream die. That would have been an interesting philosophical change. Like,
Yeah.
for somebody like her, like if she believed what Nicholas Holtz believed, that would have made her choice of the cheeseburger so much more meaningful.
That's true, because that wouldn't be her eating what she's used to. It would be like, you know what? Maybe after all this, all I want is a good cheeseburger.
Like, that's change. That's
Yeah.
transformation. And
No,
Nicholas
that's a
Holt's
good
character
note.
was more interesting because of that. Like, why not? This is an example of they've chosen a boring protagonist because it's safe or whatever. And like, I want flawed. He was more flawed than her. Like,
Oh yeah.
significantly. We want our characters to be messed up. Like, you know, people always talk about how Pixar movies have amazing stories. It's because their protagonists are really flawed, you know?
Absolutely. I will say though that I feel like this, I mean, you mentioned it at the very beginning, but I feel like this had such good ideas. Like there was a lot of reveals that I was just like, holy crap. Like, wow, you're taking this far. Like, for example, the one where I mean, the one chef just shooting himself for Jeremy's mess. I was not expecting that. I don't know
Yeah,
what
that was interesting. That was
I
interesting.
was like, holy crap. Then the other one that really got me was I thought that the tacos, the tortillas, thought that was pretty interesting with all
With
the
having
print.
the actual like memories or
Yeah, like where he'd like dug up stuff from their past. That I thought that was really great. And then I mean, that one story that he told about his taco nights shook me. Just casually talking, and he's like, "Oh yeah, my she kind of sucks. My whole family kind of sucked actually," and telling this like deeply personal story. I felt like that kind of stuff. That was the parts of it that really, really worked for me. Was like, Jesus, like
the
these kind
first
of
half of the movie, when
yeah,
we believe that, like, when we're still in when the diners still believe that they're being presented a theatrical experience, right?
yeah. I was like, is like this is I don't know, shocking, amazing. It wasn't like good amazing, but it was like, holy crap.
Mm.
How awkward would it be there for that? Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's just kind of like, you know, the second half of the movie for me just really, it just didn't work for me.
I feel like there was something very sterile about the way that they said you're gonna die. And then they all just kind of, for the most part, went with it.
Accept it. Like, the
Yeah.
moment they say you're gonna die, it's like, oh no, I'm gonna die. Well, rather than being like, I need to get the fuck out of here. You
Yeah,
know?
it's like I feel like in that situation it almost lost. Well, okay, I have two minds. Mine number one is I feel like wouldn't there be a moment where like these humans would try to come together and like fight their way out? That's one thing that's like I want to see that. But I'd say the thing that interests me about the way that they went and something that I would like to go deeper into is this idea that all of these rich people who live a life of privilege are kind of just passively waiting for someone else to fix the situation for them. And then Anya Taylor-Joy's character is the only one who's like truly actively pursuing help. And I thought that was something I'd like to see it pushed one of two ways. I'd either like to see them all really team up together and try to like fight their way out and it just doesn't work and they're all kind of dying one by one. Or I'd really want to see leaning into this idea that these people just don't know how to help themselves.
Do you know what also might have been interesting?
Hmm.
If he presented the illusion of choice that they could save themselves to
Oh.
humiliate them, right? Like he could have still decided, I'm going to kill all these people, but like he could have been like, maybe you have a chance to save yourself, you know? Like, I think that might have been interesting and created like like more activity of like they would have tried to make their case. They would have tried to. There would have been more conflict.
But like,
honestly,
it's like at the end of the day, did they, for the review, the lady who's the critic,
yes,
it's like maybe she had the option of like recant your review or like review something. I mean, since the satire, maybe it would be like give this one place, like give McDonald's a 5-star review, and she's like, I can't do it. Something,
something, yeah,
like something like that. But okay, so we've really talked about how we would improve it, but what are your takeaways? Like, what do you think it did well that you kind of learned from it that you
picked a
would
great
want to
setting
apply?
and a great bucket of ideas, right? Like, I think they had the right instincts about like, oh, this environment, the kitchen, fine dining for the extremely wealthy, that is kind of a distorted space with a lot of opportunity for high stakes comedy and people who have like built their whole identities around it, like whether it's the foodie who loves food so much, it's the critic who sort of builds this sort of intellectual gatekeeping facade around food, or the chef themselves who believes that they're the great artist, right? There are lots of great archetypes that we all see play out and everybody can relate to. And also there's something about food which is it's a universal experience. Like everybody can relate to the idea of going to eat something or at least have somebody cook for you. And everyone understands that the experience of, oh my God, this is literally a rock with a scallop on it, is kind of a theatrical, non-organic experience, right? Like that's very alienating to most people. And most people know about that. So the presentation of that conflict, not the presentation of the conflict, but that universal shared human interest in people like to eat and people love food with a story about the distortions of fine dining, I feel like that's a really great idea for a movie. It's not like somebody's decided to make a high stakes high stakes movie about, bagpipers or something, fewer people listen to bagpiping specifically, right? That was a weird example, but it's like when you have a universal concept mixed with like an analysis of an interesting social environment, that's a great choice of subject matter.
I agree. The hyper specific is something that's really neat. It's like, can you go deep into this world and then kind of finding things that we accept as mundane, but are just like a little unhinged, like like fine dining that's meant to be super grounded, but is only accessible to the ultra rich, that kind of stuff. Like finding things that we take for granted that are already kind of like disturbing about the world we live in, and pushing it further to make it more off kilter, like more uneasy. I think that there's something really neat about that. And then I know that when we had Nathan Graham Davis on, he was talking to us about some of the rewrites he had to do, where they wanted to make sure that different characters had enough lines in the script to reasonably cast a fancy actor, right? And I think that Nicholas Holt's character was an example of a secondary character who I think was really phenomenally written and gave Nicholas Holt a lot to play with, so you could cast someone like him in the role.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that honestly, he overshadowed Margot's character. I think Tyler was a more interesting character, but if you could have pulled off both, I think that's just a very good example of how you can write something to land a very fancy actor, even if they're not going to be the protagonist, even if they're not going to be around for the whole film. So just for me, it's like remembering that you can elevate these smaller roles and make them more interesting.
Another way I would think of it, like if you're doing like an ensemble film or you have a lot of secondary characters, make sure that every one of those characters or relationships has like a crisis or like a big emotional problem. Like the couple who were the politician couple who had been there 11 times. He clearly is struggling with some form of weird, infidelity, right? That's a
Ugh.
problem, right? And
Yeah.
the actor is struggling with like his relationship and the power dynamics of that relationship, him being a star who has power over her career and wanting her to not be in the industry, and her wanting to like have him help her, and also the fact that maybe his star is fading and doesn't really know what his next step is going to be. Like, that's a great personal crisis. Each of those characters is like, I could imagine an actor reading that being like, oh, this is something I can work with. It's like actual, it's not just the lines, it's like the dramatic situation under the hood. Like, oh, this is like a situation that's interesting. I think another great ensemble film, Knives Out 1, right? Like, every one of the family members had a dramatic situation relevant to the larger plot, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think if you want to like make roles that are exciting, that the actors would want to play, make sure that something's happening under the surface for these side characters and make it meaningful to the overall story.
Absolutely. It's like by giving them these interesting backstories, you give the actors interesting subtext to work with. And, remembering that actors are artists who want to play with something dynamic and interesting. And filling that out a little bit. I think absolutely. Oh, I see here. So the mom, Adam. The mom. What was the deal with the mom? I think
that she was there for like to create intrigue in the moment, and then they kind of forgot what to do with her.
Yeah, it feel like she was like a two joke.
Yeah.
A two joke thing. It was like the first payoff of her being there is that he gets to tell that terrible story and then serve the chicken with the scissors in it.
Which was a great moment.
That was a great beat. The other one I think was kind of like a joke about like these men and maybe like their relationship with their mom, but it wasn't ever really explored. Like, if he was more doing this, like, is he doing this to try to be good enough for his mom? Like, what's going on? It felt like there was something that they had started to tap into psychologically about why she's there that would have been more connected to this whole satire and parody that they have going on. But then they just kind of let her be there only for the chicken, the scissors and the chicken. Also, though, something that I thought was really nice about this is that it for the most part, it was in one room, right? Like, that's really hard to do. And this was a Blacklist script, if I'm not mistaken. Wasn't it? It was on the Blacklist. So
I believe I heard that. I did not.
I need to confirm, but I'm pretty sure that it was on the Blacklist. So
if anyone, you could see this as it's a thriller in one location. That's like really typically easier to it's easier to sell.
Yeah. So, okay, if you were going to write this type of film, how would you go about it?
You mean a single location thriller?
I guess there's a few layers to that, because it's like on one side, it's like, yes, a single location thriller. And then the other one is like, there's a second layer of that's also a satire. So maybe we take it one at a time. How would you approach a single location thriller?
I think, and to the credit of this film, they do this very well. I would think about what the world of this single location is like socially. What's the social dynamic of this place that the characters are going to be in, and what are the limitations of that place, right? Like, and that's where I would start, for sure, because in this film there's definitely a very specific world, the world of fine dining, and in that world there's a division between the clients and the servers, and that's the exploration, right? Like, I would identify, okay, what is the world of this single location, and who are the people that inhabit it, and what's the conflict, right? Not just the surface level conflict of, oh my God, there's zombies outside, I don't want to die in the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, if there are zombies outside and you're in a room, who are the people here? And what is the conflict between the people and why is it interesting, that's where I would go. So if it's a world where you're all in one room and the zombies outside, like that's a very generic concept. But you can do something interesting with that generic concept if you really make compelling interpersonal conflict choices between the characters and make that part of the drama of the single location. I think a great example that's talked about all the time, it was Reservoir Dogs, right? You know, the whole film, with the exception of some flashbacks, takes place in one warehouse. And the conceit of the film is it's after a heist gone wrong, and we flash back to before the heist. We never see the heist. So it's all of the people congregating back after the heist went wrong at the warehouse, talking about how it went wrong, right? Like, so, and in that world, you have all these con artists who don't trust each other, who think that someone betrayed them, and they're trying to find who's the rat, right? And there is, one of them was a cop. We never know exactly what happened at the heist, right? So that's an interesting social dynamic. That's an interesting social interpersonal decision space that is meaningful in one location for the characters. So you had identified the location. What's the drama? Rambling a little bit.
No, I mean, I think that that's a really good note. So it's like choosing the space and then kind of building on what you said. I would say that I would really think about making every character that you're now going to put in this space really work for their spot. What in their life led them to being here? What makes them being here inevitable? And what makes conflict inevitable when you put them all together? So really, like, rather than thinking about them as like, we need someone who's going to be the brave one, we need someone who's going to be the smart one, like, putting together a heist. It's like, you want to make sure it's like, what is the personal reason, probably connected to their flaw, that each of these people ended up here? Like, how are they all tied to this space? And I think that kind of gets interesting as the story unravels, is figuring out what brought everybody here. That's a part that I always really enjoy watching. And then also really thinking about, okay, it's not enough to put everyone into this world. Like, we get everyone into the restaurant. It's a fine dining thing. It's an excellent world. You still need the catalyst. Like, you still need the gunpowder that's going to launch everything into conflict. So really thinking about what's one event with lots of ripples, right? Like, how are you going to make this situation, like, ratchet it up 10 levels? How are you going to elevate all of the stakes for everyone at once? So those, I guess, are like the three ingredients, which it's true of almost everything, but is maybe if you were planning this, it might be helpful to think of it this way. It's who's here, and more importantly, why are they here now? Why did they earn their spot? You have where are we? Kind of like getting us isolated in a spot where they can't leave. And then you have what happens. You have what is the big event that's going to set off a chain reaction that impacts everyone in the room. That's how I'd approach it. So then now the second half of that question is satire. How would you approach a satire?
I think the same way I would approach the world. I would think about what are the ideas in conflict, right? And like, what am I satirizing, and why is it serious, right? And why is it funny, right? Like, you don't just satire. I don't think satire plays unless it's like a real commentary with a real truthful perspective, right? So like, what are you criticizing, and why is your criticism true? Very true. Like, what's the point of view of the movie is really what I'm saying. That's really important. And obviously, if you've picked a funny concept, like, or an angle into something, a funny angle into something, the situation played straight will create comedy.
Yeah. I think the typical way to kind of go into it, or like not typical, but one way in, is that you choose something like what we were talking about before. You choose something that we've kind of accepted as normal, but has absurd elements. You identify what those absurd elements are, and then you bring them into the spotlight. You highlight them. So if you were going to satirize, I don't know, public school, I feel like I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here. But if
Yeah,
you were
don't
going
go
to
down
do
that rabbit
that,
hole.
well, I went to public school. No. So I feel like if you were going to satirize something like that, then you would think about, okay, what are the absurd elements of this that we've just kind of accepted as okay? And maybe it would
Hmm.
be standardized testing. We put everyone in a room. We have these kids just kind of locked down and take these standardized tests for a long time. If I was going to satirize something with that, then I would take that to an extreme. Like, what does the extreme version of that look like? Or what is that? How do I highlight the problems with that? Like, what are the problems? Are the problems that we're asking people
Right. Like, what are the
to
things that
answer?
shouldn't be standardized that are standardized? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Exactly. Like, who's on high making this test? Like, what does this test mean for people? Like, you start asking questions about, like, okay, why is this a problem? What's absurd about this? What's interesting, what's weird, and you keep going. You kind of treat the real world like it's a sci-fi world that you made up, and now you're going to push it further. Um, that's how I would, if I was going to go down a satire route, that's what I would do.
Well,
But yeah,
thank you everybody for joining us today.
yeah. Thank
We
you.
are meeting tomorrow, actually,
Yes.
for a special live stream. We're going to discuss the show Kaleidoscope on Netflix, which is interesting in that it is a non-linear narrative where the episodes are presented to you randomly and still present a coherent story.
Yep. So instead of the episodes being numbered, like episode 1, 2, 3, 4, they're colors. And basically, the way it goes is that Netflix will queue them up for you in a random order. And you kind of have a unique experience based on what order was selected for you. So we're going to be looking at that tomorrow. We're kind of experimenting with a new Saturday time. It's going to be Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So we're hoping to see everybody there.
Unless you
And
live in Europe and that's the middle of the night, stay asleep.
yep, sorry, Europeans. And then, and then the week after, so the next Friday,
Oh, yeah, so next Friday.
Next Friday we're doing RRR, which just won Best Original Song, I believe.
It's a 3-hour action-packed movie with a capital M. It is extremely it is extremely movie.
It is everything.
It is extremely movie. Lots of dumb action sequences done really well.
Musicals, tigers,
yes,
fighting,
people fighting
bromance.
On tigers with motorcycles, and then dance numbers. It's a lot of movie.
A lot of movie. So that's it for today then. Thank you
All
so
right.
much, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow and/or next week.
All right, fantastic.